a little bit, and I've asked Sherry to be my Vanna White, if that's okay to click, and I like to move around, so I hope that's okay. Nobody has ever accused me, by the way, in 28 years of law practice, no one has ever accused me of not speaking loud enough. So if you need me to speak louder, just say so. But no judge has ever asked me to speak louder. I have been asked to be quiet a few times, but we won't go there. Let's talk a little bit about Peachtree Creek. You want to click on July 20, 1864 is the situation north of Atlanta. Over the last 3 months, 90 days and 90 miles, the federal armies, right, 3 of them, the Army of the Cumberland, the Tennessee, and the Ohio, all 3 in uneven numbers actually, commanded by none other than one of those Ohio generals, Sherman. By the way, when I was growing up in the genteel South, where speech is much, well, maybe not so much anymore, but profanity was just not allowed, with one exception. Want to guess who? Let's talk about the situation, though. From the Chattahoochee River, from Chattanooga to the Chattahoochee in just 90 days, and it would lead one Aunt Pitty Pat to say, "Yankees in Georgia, how did they ever get in?" If you think about it, if you were down in Atlanta, way on down in the deep South, in Atlanta, and 3 years of the war has gone on, but all of the fighting has happened way up yonder in Virginia, Tennessee, maybe even all the way over there on the river of Mississippi. But the interior of Georgia, the heart, the interior of the Confederacy, the heart, I ain't seen any Yankees, except some Andrews Raiders, right? So there was a false sense of security way on down in Atlanta, and so that's a pretty apropos statement by Aunt Pitty Pat, isn't it? So now, why does Peachtree Creek become the center point in the battles for Atlanta? I want to click on we first of all, how do we get there? Well, some naked Yankees had to cross Chattahoochee River first. Colonel William Brownlow, actually from East Tennessee, those are Unionists. And they decided to strip down to their BVDs because in the hot July summer, if you've ever been down in Georgia, you wouldn't want to wear wool coats, would you? So they took them off and they went across the creek. And Peachtree Creek, the Chattahoochee River is pretty shallow in places and rocky, and it's a fun place to go tubing or rafting in the summer, even today, especially today. And these guys had repeating rifles. In fact, they came with the Henrys, 16-shot rifles, and they would come across at Roswell Factory, by the way, at a place called Soap Creek, S-O-A-P, Creek, just below Roswell Factory, where there were some shoals. And as they crossed over, they would use the rocks in the river to hide behind, and so literally they were like bobbing as they came up and down and would cock and keep firing. And some of Iverson, General Iverson from Georgia, and the Georgia cavalry was defending on the other side. Some of them just actually surrendered because they wanted to see those all-week shooters. They wanted to look at those guns and say, my goodness, you load them up on Sunday and they fire all week. Cost some of them a trip to Camp Douglas. They didn't have as good experience in Chicago as we did. We'll click along. And that was on the 8th and 9th of July. And that opened up the wagon crossings. There were actually 3 that were set up. This is Howard's 4th Corps. 64th Ohio, and so the heights. By the way, I want to tell you these sketches. Most of them are from artists that follow the Army. That we all know this, and this is from a Harper's Weekly. You can take a sketch like that, and if you know where to look and you know where to go, you can match it up today and see that same terrain. Isn't that magic? They didn't just do it out of cartoons and fiction. They were there. If there was a hill in that picture, because there was a hill in their view when they drew it. Okay. So Sherman opened up the Chattahoochee River, and Johnston pretty much let him across. Didn't really defend very strongly. With 11 Confederate cavalry brigades of about 400 to 700 men, roughly 6,500 Confederate cavalry having to do a screen all the way from Duluth, where my mother lives now, in northeast Atlanta, all the way down to Six Flags, Mableton, the land of screams and dreams. So that's I-20 west. Now, I-85 north, 10-15 miles, and I-20 west, 5 miles. That's about a 40-mile swath. How are you going to stop the Federal Army of 100+ thousand with 6,500 cavalry screens, right? And all the fords and places they might can come across. Well, we know the breakdown of the armies. We have 3 in the north for the Federal armies, and General George H. Thomas, the Rock of Chickamauga. He is going to command the largest army, the Army of the Cumberland, named for rivers, right? Yankees like rivers and Southerners like states, so they name their armies after rivers. The Army of the Cumberland River by George Henry Thomas. He's my favorite Yankee, by the way. He's a Virginian. Okay, James Birdsey McPherson from Ohio. All these Yankee generals from Ohio. That's the general state, isn't it? Illinois wouldn't like that, but they just bled, right? Illinois brought all the soldiers, didn't they? Along with all the rest of the Midwest. You guys won the war. Don't let the people write the books in the East tell you otherwise, right? It was Illinois and Wisconsin and Indiana and Michigan and Ohio and on. Keep naming them, right? Ohio, yep. Okay, so let's get on with it. James Birdsey McPherson. I am told by Dr. Richard McMurray that his name is Birdsey, not Birdseye. McPherson, not McPherson. You know why? His own McPherson's descendants have told Richard that it's Birdsey and there is no fear in McPherson. So that's the correct pronunciation if you ever come across a descendant. Okay, so John Schofield from, Schofield Barracks, right, out at Pearl Harbor. He's going to command the small army of the Ohio. What's the relative sizes of these units? About 12,000, 1 corps, the 23rd Corps, 3 corps, but smaller. Why? Because these guys have been carrying the water. They're the guys that took island number 10 in Belmont. Then they went down the river. What did they take next? Donelson and Henry. Nashville fell. Then they go to Shiloh. They get embarrassed on day 1. But they come back and do the trick on day 2, don't they? Go down. It takes them a while, but they finally get Vicksburg. Later they come over and join in Chattanooga after the fall of the Army of the Cumberland at Chickamauga. After their, what did they do? They did well on the first day and then had a bad second day, didn't they, at Chickamauga? But these guys have about 25,000 in 3 corps, the 16, the 17, and the 15, 16, 17 corps. And these guys have the 4th Corps, the 20 Corps, and the 14th Corps. And many of those, well, they're all loaded with Midwesterners, but some of these guys are fellows that have been fighting in the East. The old 10th and 11th Corps have merged under a guy named Joseph B. Hooker. We remember him, right? Back in Chancellorsville, he had a bad day, right? Well, he's commanding the 20 Corps in Thomas's army. 60,000, 56,000 infantry. So they're double this one and 4 times this one, all told about 100,000. On the Confederate side, we have Joseph E. Johnston commanding the Army of Tennessee, and we have Leonidas Polk. Oh, wait a minute. He took a cannonball on the 14th of June at Pine Mountain, thanks to Peter Simonson's 5th Indiana Battery. And so he's gone, and now Alexander Peter Stewart, a lawyer, Southern lawyer from the Lebanon School of Law east of Nashville, he's now in command. And let's click on. All right, here are the protagonists. We have Uncle Billy Sherman to the left, and he gets a bad rap, doesn't he? Southerners hate him. Why? Because he was good. Because he won. And but he understood something. What's the famous expression that we tie to General Sherman? War is? Shh, you can't say that. That's a bad word. He didn't say that. He actually told a lady who had written him because up in Tennessee during the winter of 63, getting ready to go out in 64, she wrote him and said, General, your soldiers have taken all of my livestock. They've trampled, they've destroyed my barn, they've taken all of my food. What shall I do? And he wrote her back and he said, ma'am, he said, I am trying to do my best to end this war. And if it means a little suffering by the civilian population in order to feed my army so that I can get this thing over with, the sooner the better. War is cruelty. That's what he said. He wrote her and he said, war is cruelty. You can't put lipstick on a pig, can you? That's another way of looking at it, Southern viewpoint. All right, so anyway, that's Uncle Billy. James Birdsey McPherson, he's going to get his 2 days later, unfortunately, at the Battle of Atlanta. I call it sort of the Battle of Decatur because it was actually in between Decatur and Atlanta, sort of in between, but that's what the cyclorama depicts. It's now been moved. Can I tell a surprise, Randy? Jim, is that part of it? You better go on the tour, you'll get to see it. And it's a big deal. It's been moved and it's been refurbished and it's going to be at the Atlanta History Center and opened, and you're going to be one of the first groups to see it.
When they took us out to lunch, they asked us a while ago, they didn't have to ask twice.
Yeah. So my friend Gordon Jones will turn the light on for you that day at the Atlanta History Center. Maybe Steve Davis will be there too. You can poke at him a little bit. Let's go to the next slide. We'll talk about the rest of the guys. I'm dragging on a little bit. Rock of Chickamauga to the left, George H. Thomas. By the way, did you know that he, when he decided he was going to stay with the Union and fight for the North, his wife was from New York, by the way. She probably lobbied a little bit, but his sisters in Virginia couldn't bear the thought, and they turned his picture away to the wall and never looked at his face again.
Tore up his papers too.
Isn't that awful? Something about him, I'll tell you one of the reasons why he's by the way, my favorite president, Lincoln. Blasphemy by some of my Mississippi cousins and uncle, but he really is. And Abraham Lincoln was quite a man, obviously, and for the time, man for the times, wasn't he? Let's move on and talk about Thomas. He when the after the war, they reinterred a lot of the soldiers. The Northern Army did a great job of keeping records of where they buried them. So if Captain Jones from the 129th Illinois, let's say, fell dead at Peachtree, he would be buried alongside the road at Collier Road at Peachtree, 1/3 of a mile west of the Buckhead Road, under an oak tree. Then they would go back after the war, dig him up, and move him over to the Marietta National Cemetery. And if it was north of the Etowah River, say Dalton or Resaca or Chicago or Chattanooga, he would be buried in the Chattanooga Cemetery. Well, they were building the Chattanooga Cemetery the winter of 63, 64. Thomas was in charge of the Army of the Cumberland, and hence the garrison. And some of the men there said, General Thomas, they had already started the cemetery up at Gettysburg, right? That summer before. So they'd already had a something going. And they're all buried by state up there. There's all the New Yorkers, all the Pennsylvanians, so many, and all the, every state, right? At Chattanooga, they asked, what about, do you want us to do it by state, General? And he said, no, mix them up. I'm tired of states' rights. Think about that. He's a man for the job too, wasn't he? To the right, John Schofield, nice beard. We'll move along. And let's look at the southern side. We have Joe Johnston, an after-war picture to the right. And moving on, we have 3 generals. His lieutenants commanded the 3 corps, the 3 Confederate corps. There actually were 2 corps in the Army of Tennessee, named after the state. The 3rd corps would be A.P. Stewart's corps later. It was still at Peachtree. It was still named the Army of Mississippi, which was the army that had fought over in the state of Mississippi up until now. All right, to the left, General William Hardee commanded nearly 20,000 Confederates. One of these guys, by the way, was in his 50s during the Battle of Peachtree Creek. One was in his 40s, and one was in his 30s. Can you guess which one's which? It's a trick question. John Bell Hood, this is a post-war, so it's taken about 10 years after the war, so it dates him. He's probably the ripe old age of 46 when this picture's in his mid-40s. But he was 33 when he took command of the Confederate armies in Atlanta. Stewart is in his 40s, mid-40s, and Hardee is 54 at the time. Okay. All right, looking at the Army group, remember I said that there are about 88,000 Federal infantry, 106,000 total. The infantry is the building block, really. That's what you're really judged by in terms of what your fighting capacity is. And then the Confederate force, roughly half that, 44,000. Now, when you take state militia and everything else, you can call it 60,000 of machinists and people toting a gun somewhere around Atlanta, but actually fighting trim soldiers that might have been the equal of the fighting trim soldiers that Sherman had, about 2 to 1. Okay. Challenge Steve Davis when you bring him up next time on that number for me. Okay, let's go to the next one, if we would. And then we have a breakdown. How do we know these figures? Well, when General Hood took command, he didn't know exactly what he had, so he sent out a request, a note to all the commands, and he said, would you please jot down? And so they did. They said, oh, my brigade's about 1,000 men, my brigade's about so, 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 and so. And so they wrote it all up, and guess what? One of those copies was captured by one of Thomas's guys on the banks of, by the Paces Ferry Road at Nancy Creek. So guess what? When Hood's learning on Monday the 18th and Tuesday the 19th of July about his forces, so's Billy Sherman. He knows exactly how many men Hood has as well, but that was from a captured document. Okay, that's okay. What's the challenge? If you're the smaller guy in a fight, if you're the smaller guy, if you're Dave and you're going up against Goliath, you're outnumbered 2 to 1. What you going to do? What are you going to do? You want to punch him in the nose early? Huh? Make him go home? Yeah, punch him in the nose early, right? That's the Lee Jackson school that General Hood liked to call it. That's pretty cool, wasn't it? That was a lot of fun the first year or two when Jackson was whipping those Yankees up and down the Shenandoah Valley, right? Yeah, all that stuff at Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville. But you know what? He was bleeding his army out. They only had limited resources. North had more of everything. Everything, right? What's the other policy if you're the smaller guy in a fight?
Prevent defense.
Prevent defense, yeah. How about Muhammad Ali, for example? I floats like a butterfly, I sting like a bee. Ain't nobody got nothing on me, right? And little old Muhammad Ali, we think of him as a big man. He was fighting in the heavyweight class, but he was fighting against bigger men, Foreman and Frazier. What did he do? He played rope-a-dope. You remember that? Y'all remember rope-a-dope? Okay. He was famous for rope-a-dope. Rope-a-dope was let the other bigger guy throw his arms out, fight him out, just until he got so tired and worn out that finally about the 11th and 12th round, he'd come out and say, now I got you. And he would land the one to win it. That is known as the Fabian policy, named for Roman Emperor Tyrannus Fabius II, who defended Rome against Hannibal the cannibal. Hannibal, with his elephants from North Africa. He had 285,000 men, came up through the Pyrenees, went around the Alps, and came on down to Rome, right? And defending Rome was only about 35,000. Well, as they fell back, as the Roman army fell back, they picked up more men. Finally, they grew. This was over 8 years or so, okay? So it wasn't the summer of 64. But anyway, they grew their army to about 85,000. The harsh winters of northern Italy caused the elephants to die out, and many men were lost to disease, so that he finally had even numbers, and he was able to defeat Hannibal and preserve Rome. Who else in history has done that to success? Washington. Give up New York. I love New York. However, you can have it. I'll keep my army, and I'll keep the dream alive. Give up Philadelphia. Give up all the cities, Boston, but keep your army alive. Even if they're freezing to death at Valley Forge, you still got the spirit, right? And you still got the army, you still got the ability to keep the war effort. Johnston followed the Fabian policy. Joe Johnston, a Virginian. Unfortunately for him, his president, Jefferson Davis, preferred the more aggressive policy. Didn't work out too well. Blitzkrieg was pretty exciting for the Germans at the beginning of that war. So was Pearl Harbor for the Japanese. Didn't work out too well for the Germans and Japanese, did it? Punched the big guy in the nose. Woke the big guy up. Well, the South has this great dilemma, and we Southerners sit around our coffee pots and our bourbons and debate this very question. Which one was better? Jackson. We've got statues of Jackson. We've got more statues of Lee all over every city in the South because that was cool. Yo, you remember the day we got them at so-and-so? Well, that's pretty self-centered, isn't it? I love Shelby Foote in the PBS documentary when he said, you know, let me see if I can get his voice. Why the South was doomed for Yankees had something to do with it. You know? They know how to fire a gun too. They know something about fighting, at least out in the West they do. They did in the East. It took them a while. So how are you going to defend? Johnston's idea was let's fall back. Let's keep falling back. Some Southerners joke that if and maybe Richard McMurray might say if Johnston was left in command, the war would still be going on, and he'd be holed out in one of the Keys in Florida. So maybe that's possible. We'll move on. I've spent a little too much time. We'll go a little quicker here. So there were emails going back and forth from Richmond to Atlanta. Did y'all know that they had emails back then? Did you know they had emails? The telegraph line, right? So President Davis is tapping out an email about every day or two to Johnston. What are your plans? What are your plans to defend Atlanta? And Johnston emails back, sir, I'm trying to do the best I can. They outnumber me 2-1. Well, a week goes by, and then Davis has to find out, not from his general, but from other ways, the newspaper and from other people, some of the congressmen in the cabinet, other people are finding out that Sherman has crossed over the Chattahoochee River. And so the president taps back to and says, now tell me what your plans. I hear that Sherman's on the south bank of the Chattahoochee River. If so, this threatens Alabama and our communications with the rest of the West and the Trans-Mississippi. All of the breadbasket of Alabama and Mississippi that's still available. All the ironworks of Selma, what would later be Birmingham. So all of that's threatened with Sherman's crossing over of the Chattahoochee River. So what is Johnston going to do about it? Well, Johnston writes back, I'm trying to make Atlanta ready so that she may be defended for a day or two by the militia, such that my movements may be freer and wider. So that doesn't sit well with the president, so he relieves him of command, brings in John Bell Hood, the 33-year-old, who lost a leg at Chickamauga the September before and lost the use of an arm at Gettysburg, July 2nd. Round tops, right? Devil's Den. And so they get to the banks of Peachtree Creek, and we have some beautiful sketches. By the way, if you go to the Atlanta History Center, ask to see some of the Wilbur Kurtz paintings and sketches. He was an Atlanta historian. He was actually from the North, and he was he was a city planner, first city manager of Atlanta back in the early part of the 1900s. And he was so excited about the great locomotive chase that he married Captain Fuller's daughter. So that's the Moore's Mill. And then Howell's Mill. Howell Mill is very famous in the Atlanta area. Now let's look at the situation on the evening of July 19. We have Peachtree Creek. We have the Chattahoochee River. We have Davis's division and Baird and Johnston. That's the 14 Corps. We have Gary's division along with Williams and Ward's division are going to be behind him. That's the 20 Corps. And we have Wood's Division of the 4th Corps. Okay. So what's the plan? This was originally Johnston's idea. He actually had a plan to make some type of an offensive movement. He was relieved because he wouldn't fight, but he also wouldn't tell Davis what his plans were. He had an idea at Peachtree. What he wanted to do was draw Sherman down closer and closer. He knew that Sherman would probably send part of his army over to the right, which he did. McPherson's force went all the way over to cut the Augusta Railroad. They called it the Georgia Railroad, the Bank of Augusta, Bank of Georgia. And to a place called Gibraltar. Anybody know where that is? Y'all probably been there. Stone Mountain. Gibraltar back then. And so McPherson's Army of the Tennessee was going to go on a wide arc to the east to cut that road. And while that happened, that would then split Sherman's force or spread it out so wide that some of it would be exposed, and perhaps the Army of the Cumberland would be crossing over the creek at Peachtree, which, by the way, is a pretty wide, about 40 feet wide. You'll see it this summer if you go. And it's not too deep. You know, it's 4 to 6 feet deep mostly. But the banks are real steep. It's like this room. So you can't, unless you bridge it, you can't get wagons over. So if you cross over on a footbridge or a log or just jumping over, you're going to be lightly defending on the other side. That means you've only got your guns and 40 rounds to the man. Hopefully it wasn't wet if you crossed and didn't get your ammo wet. Until it takes a few hours to build the bridges so you can bring the cannons over and all the other supplies and the extra ammunition and secure and maybe dig in and build entrenchments. Okay, moving on. The plan was supposed to be at 1 o'clock on July 20. John Bell Hood, by the way, had to take Johnston's idea, and then, y'all recognize this guy, huh? Everybody recognize this guy? Illinois, right? Illinois, I'm your boy. I'm a Dan Fogelberg fan, by the way. Grew up loving his music. Captain Francis DeGrasse, he kind of upset the apple cart along with the Yankees to the east. McPherson's guys were going a little too quickly. They did take Gibraltar, they did cut the railroad, and they were moving on the Decatur Road toward Atlanta. So Hood, who had planned to launch the attack at 1 o'clock on July 20, a Wednesday, had to slide part of the army over to the east to face that threat. His old corps, commanded by General Stevenson that day, commanded by General Cheatham, Ben Cheatham, the governor of Tennessee that day, in temporary command, had to come over to the east and slide east and block that. And so while that was happening, he then had to move, when he discovered that there were Federals closer to Atlanta than he realized, instead of launching the attack at 1, General Hardee, who was going to be the hammer of this attack with his 18,000, had to slide a little bit to the east, and they went all the way over from about Mount Zion Church at I-75 at the connector. Y'all know these. I tell Atlantans, and they know where all these places are, to Piedmont Park, the north end of Piedmont Park, which is on the northeast extreme, about 1.5 miles, 2 miles east. But at 1 o'clock, the first shots landed in Atlanta. There were 3 rounds that landed in Atlanta, and it was from DeGrasse's battery. That was at the Carter Center, by the way, that hill, if you go there, the Carter Center, northeast of Atlanta. Okay? And so let's move to the next slide. So we'll look at a map here and see what we're talking about. Here's I-75, so you're coming down from Chicago, there's Marietta, you come on in, you're in Atlanta now. And then it joins I-85 to the northwest, and that connects. Those roads didn't exist, by the way, at the time of the war. I just put them, just making sure we know. Okay, all right, so here's the defenses of Atlanta. This is Piedmont Park, all the way from here, all the way down. Oakland Cemetery is at the bottom of the page to orient you, and this is where all the big tall buildings are. Not half as many as the Windy City, but we've got a few. But to the east, we have Bates Division of Finley's Floridians, Tyler Smith, Georgia and Tennessee Brigade, and then to the left, Lewis's Kentucky Orphan Brigade. Remember those guys? Okay, those are going to be over here to the far right. They're going to launch the attack. Then you have the next group, 3 brigades under General Walker. Stevens, Gist, pronounced Gist, States Rights Gist, what a name, huh, from South Carolina. He's going to get his, by the way, at Franklin on November 30th. And General Mercer, Hugh Weedon Mercer from Georgia. So mostly Georgians here in Walker's division, and they're supposed to come in. And you know the expression, right down Peachtree. Well, this is Peachtree Street, or the Buckhead Road. It goes out to Buckhead. And then to the left we have 4 brigades, which is the All-Tennessee Division, commanded usually by Benjamin Cheatham. But remember, Cheatham has just been placed in command of General Hood's corps, which is over here off to the east. So we have General Maney, another lawyer, Southern lawyer named George Maney, from the Lebanon School of Law. By the way, that's Samford University today down in Birmingham, but that was originally up near Nashville. But General Maney has these 4 brigades, about 5,000 Tennesseans. And then in reserve, we have 4 more brigades, including Mark Lowry's guys. And where's Randy? The 5th Mississippi, one of his descendants, or one of his ancestors is in that unit. And so that's Claiborne's division. They're being held in reserve down below a place called White Columns, or the where the Amtrak station is at Brookwood Station in Atlanta if you ever take the train to Atlanta. Unfortunately, we don't have a line that runs to Chicago. I wish we did. So that's the plan. 18,000 Confederates are supposed to make this attack from right to left, sweeping the Federals that have crossed Peachtree Creek and run them up into the creek and beyond and up to the back of the Chattahoochee River. That's the plan. That's the game plan. Defending this hill where Piedmont Hospital is today, and where Peachtree Road racers on the 4th of July call it Cardiac Hill. They call that, they have to climb that thing or race up it on the 4th of July in the road race. Well, anyway, that hill is only a 2,700 small division under General Newton. By the way, some of those guys are the same guys that are going to be heroes at Franklin, too. And then further to the, so they're part of the 4th Corps. They're one division of Howard's 4th Corps. The other 2 have been sent off to the east to try to connect with the rest of the Federals under Schofield and McPherson that are out here to the east and northeast. Then we have General Ward, Gary, and Williams. That's the 20 Corps. Then we have the other 3 divisions that make up Palmer's 14th Corps under John M. Palmer. Okay, we'll switch on. Let's look at what Hardee's guys do. That's an overview map that's in your, sort of a version of that's in the handout that you got, and also one of the maps that's for sale. And we'll click on and cover a little more detail. How do we get into here? Let's talk about the attack. First of all, I forgot to tell you, Bates Division over here at Piedmont Park, they go into the attack and they promptly get lost in the Sherwood Forest. They call that the Sherwood Forest subdivision today, but it's where the George Washington Collier Woods was, the 100-acre wood at the Sherwood Forest. That's why it's called Sherwood Forest. But they get lost over here and play out and don't participate in the battle. And so when that happens, all of a sudden the Confederate plan gets deranged. How do 2,700 Yankees defeat 18,400 Confederates? Think about those numbers. Okay, they've just crossed over. The bridge is not yet complete. So they don't have their artillery. They don't have their wagons. They don't have extra ammo. They just are trying to defend. And here comes the attack. In fact, when it happened, let's click to the next slide. Let's put these guys into play. We've talked about these guys. There's General Walker. His nickname was Shot Pouch. William Henry Talbot Walker, a slave owner from Augusta, Georgia. He's going to get his 2 days later at the Battle of Decatur, July 22. He's going to be killed there. And it was nicknamed Shot Pouch because all of these, throughout the Mexican War and wars with Indians and early parts of the Civil War, he kept getting hit with little buck and ball stuff. And he would come out of the battle and literally pull lead out of his pockets and, oh, there's a hole, and oh, I guess I got hit by a BB here. And they called him Shot Pouch. He never got it till he got it, and then he really got it on the 20th. Down here to the left, he looks like a guy I used to practice law with, Steve Farrow, but that's General Clement Hoffman Stevens. He's famous for a couple of reasons. Number one, he's a South Carolinian, he is a South Carolinian, and his brother-in-law is a guy named General Bernard B. Remember him? Yep. He's the guy at First Manassas that said, look, fellers. He didn't say fellers. He'd have been from Tennessee. Look, there stands Jackson, standing like a stone wall. Rally behind the Virginians. Then he'd got it, fell dead. So that's what last of General B that we know of. But that's his brother-in-law, Clement Hoffman Stevens. Even though he's a South Carolinian, he's got ties to Augusta on the state line, and he's commanding a Georgia brigade. And he's going to get his at Peachtree. He's going to be the only general that's killed at the Battle of Peachtree Creek. In the middle of States' Rights Gist, and to the right, the General Mercer that I talked about. Moving on we'll back up one. The federal side, let's look at the federal players. To the top right, we have General John Newton, Nathan Kimball to 1st Brigade. George Wagner is commanding. Actually, John Blake's in command that day, and Luther Bradley in the 3rd Brigade. And these are the guys. They're later going to be called Opdyke's Brigade, the 88th. Y'all know some of these guys' stories at Franklin that come out of behind the Carter House to save the day. Okay, so let's move along. So the 2,700, how are they going to defend? Let's tell the story. We got a 15th Missourian down here, a guy named Marcus Marcoute. Marcus Marcoute is a German immigrant, big stocky fella. And he came running back from a skirmish line. This was a skirmish line out in advance. And when they saw them coming, the Confederate attack coming, it was nearly 4 o'clock, by the way, not 1. It was supposed to be at 1, but that eastward shift delayed them. So now about 3:45, 4 o'clock, something like that. And he comes running back. He was from St. Louis, by the way, and he was a brick mason, a bricklayer. He comes running back, making strides of about 15 feet, saying, "Here they come, boys, and by God, 1,000,000 of them." And so everybody started running back to get in their positions, including the boy wonder, Arthur MacArthur, in the 24th Wisconsin. My son, by the way, graduated from the Macaulay School for Boys, same school that Ted Turner graduated from. And it's pretty cool. They have a sitting, somebody has sat in Congress in either the Senate or in the House of Representatives since the Eisenhower administration. That's a Macaulay grad. Isn't that something? That's pretty neat. That school is an old 1906, an old school for the boys that is at the foot of Missionary Ridge, at the very location where the 24th Wisconsin, where Arthur MacArthur picked up the flag, the American flag, and kept saying, "Onward, on Wisconsin, on Wisconsin." So guess what the fight song of Macaulay is? On Macaulay, on Macaulay. Okay, so along with 2,400 other high schools, I think I've read. So anyway, so there they are. They're running back, and they're going to be having to deal with some kind of a threat over here to their west. And to the west is we're going to find out what's going on in a minute. Okay? Now what's going to stop them is right down Peachtree. It's not 1 o'clock, it's 4 o'clock. Oh, let me tell you another little quick story. Back up one slide, please, Sherry. Right here. Where are they? 26th Ohio. Got to get Ohio in the mix. As soon as they saw the Confederates coming up at them, up the hill toward them, all the veterans start barking out, "More ammo! More ammo! Need more ammo!" Well, they hadn't fired the first shot. Why do they need more ammo? Well, they only were issued 40 rounds to the man. 60 if they're lucky, if their ordnance sergeant trusted them enough to not get them wet when they cross the creek or to leave them out in the rain or what have you. And so they didn't want to soil the ammo, so they would only issue so much at a time. But 40 rounds in a firefight would only last you about 5 or 10 minutes. If you could fire 2 or 3 shots in a minute, think about it, would only last 10 or 15 minutes perhaps, right? So then you'd be out of luck. You'd have to throw rocks or fix bayonets and charge or retreat. So immediately in a fight, when they saw an attack coming, they would immediately, even before the fighting started, it was common to say, more ammo, need more ammo, need it now. And so Sergeant John Raper, R-A-P-E-R, John Raper, who was the ordnance sergeant, he was actually corporal at that time, but he's later going to be promoted to sergeant. He goes charging back up the road to cross over the creek to go get some ammunition and carry it back to his regiment. And what does he see as he's running up? He sees this general with a black hat and a cigar in his mouth and a pair of binoculars sitting on a cracker box. Just pretty as you please, calm, as if it was a Sunday afternoon stroll. It's Thomas. George H. Thomas on the field again, the Rock of Chickamauga, and he's looking off to the east, watching this large brigade, Mercer's Georgians. Now they look like a division. In fact, previous historians put Bates' division over there, mistakenly. But it's Mercer's Georgians, about 2,000 of them. Most brigades are 1,000, 1,500. They've got over 2,000. Why? Because those boys have been guarding the forts at Savannah and places in South Georgia the first half of the war, and they hadn't seen the elephant till '64. Well, anyway, they're about to make their attack, and they're trying to get to the back door, right? To cut the Yankees off from their escape route over Peachtree Creek. Well, Raper doesn't realize that the bridge has been repaired in this time from 1 to 4, and now there are federal guns. There's 12 guns, 2 batteries, Sloan's and Smith's of Ward's division, or 12 federal cannons are lined up along with reinforcements ready to deal with it. But here they come, they get closer, 600 yards, 400, 300. Finally, Thomas pulls the cigar out and says, "Now you may give it to them, boys." Boom! Boom! The sound of the cannon fires across the field. By the way, where Applebee's is today, okay? So. Doesn't take but about 3 rounds, and it sends those Georgians back from whence they came. Thus ends the threat to the federal flank and rear. Thanks to Thomas's cool head and the timing of the thing, it took the Confederates too long to launch their attack. Think about it if they had launched it at 1, when the bridge hadn't been built and there was no artillery. There's also artillery down here under Goodspeed's battery, and they're dealing with the Confederates down in their front. The 1st Confederate Georgia and the 66th Georgia, the oldest and youngest by age in Georgia, those 2 regiments were alongside of each other, literally right on Peachtree Street. Whoop. And they're getting it. They're taking heat. They're right up on the. They're at on the federal lines. They actually reach the lines and briefly take it, but they're not supported. The rest of the Georgians are trailing off to the east, and they're disconnected by the creek where Mercer's guys are that are coming in later. And the Tennesseans are nowhere to be found. They're not even up yet. So all of a sudden, 18,400 Confederates attacking Cardiac Hill, but only 2 lone regiments, barely 300 men, 400 men max, are trying to attack 2,700. That dog don't hunt, does it? Well, in a span of about 5 to 10 minutes, they each lose 100 men. General Stevens rides his big bay horse over to the left to try to draw back his men, and he gets within 25 yards of the lines, and he is shot. He and his horse are both, he's mortally wounded. He's shot in the head, and his horse is killed right there where the Buffalo is at Ted's Montana Grill. If you go on tour this summer, you'll see Ted's Montana Grill, the Buffalo. And that's right about here. All right, so the rest of the afternoon, Hardee's Corps falls back and fights from some distance, but never threatens the position again. The Federal left is secure. Moving to the next slide. And there's Goodspeed's battery. We'll move on. And let's talk about what happens to the west in Stewart's Corps. My ancestor from the Army of Mississippi, actually Featherston's brigade, his nickname was Big Sweat because he had a high brow and he would sweat a lot. And he was a lawyer from Holly Springs, by the way. In the middle is Thomas Mellon Scott. He's from South Alabama and had moved out to the Butte part of Louisiana. That's the north half. That's not the Cajun country half. It's 2 Louisianas. Did y'all know that? Yeah, at least 2. I have a cousin from Homa. That's down in the Cajun country. They call it Coon. I'll clean it up. Coonay country. And they count backwards, by the way. They say, how far it is to town? They say, about 8 or 6 miles. So anyway, Thomas Scott's commanded some Louisianans and Alabamians, and then John Adams is a Tennessean. He's going to get his at the Cotton Gin, by the way, at Franklin on November 30. He's the guy that rides the horse, Old Charlie, right up on the ramparts and gets it in front of the 64th and 65th Ohio. Okay, so he's he's commanding a brigade of Mississippians. But he is off to the west that day with his brigade, off to the west, guarding the Chattahoochee River crossings. Yankees have already crossed. There ain't any more coming. They're all over here on the east side. But he's over there doing something there because he's told to. So there are only 2 Confederate brigades that are going to be part of Loring's division attack in Peachtree Creek. William Wing Loring, I wish I had more time to tell you about this character. He's from St. Augustine. He's a Floridian, and he's pretty cool. He's lost an arm at the Mexican War. He got shipped out west because he couldn't get along with Lee and Jackson. He kind of quarreled with them early in the war in the Shenandoah. And then he didn't get along with a guy named Pemberton. He thought it was a stupid idea to try to fight at Champion Hill and get bottled up at Vicksburg. And so he escaped with his division across the swamp. But he's got a lot of cantankerousness to him. His nickname, Old Blizzards, is because back in the Delta in 63, he would be able to, he could curse better than what's that movie? There's a great Christmas story movie. You know the line where Peter Billingsley says, "My father was a master craftsman in profanity." While he weaved in profanity the way that some artisans and craftsmen weave in pottery and clay. Well, that's William Wing Loring. Okay, he's a salty dog, and he could cuss. If a wagon or a caisson and cannon got stuck in the mud in Mississippi, and they said, "Well, General, we can't get it out. We can't. Oh, blank, blank, blank. You can." And so he would cuss that thing out. And another time he would yell at his battery, cotton battery that was fighting Admiral Porter over in the Delta at Greenville, Mississippi. He would say, "Give them blizzards, boys. Give them the blizzards." So anyway, that's where he got his nickname. We'll move. Okay, so Featherston's Mississippians, next one. We have 1,230 Mississippians. By the way, let me tell you what the orders were of the day. You know what the orders were? Anybody served in the military? Thank y'all for your service. One of the things that you learned if you ever served in the military was that that's why they sent you to drill school, right? They drilled it into you till you got it, right? You are to do no more and no less than your orders. Do exactly what you're told. If you're commanded to take that hill, what do? Take that hill. What if the Yankees are running on the other side? Do you keep chasing them? Were you ordered to keep chasing them? No. So an order was very specific. You do whatever you're told. General Hood had a very specific order of the day for the Battle of Peachtree Creek. His order was, "Gentlemen, today's the day that the fate of Atlanta and yes, the nation might be saved. You are to press the enemy, press any advantage. If the enemy are found to be in works, you are to fix bayonets and take them and press any advantage." In other words, if you get the hill, don't stop, keep on going. Push those Yankees. This is going to be a Chancellorsville. This is the day. This is the day. You're going to keep pressing, keep pressing. You've been holding back in the trenches all this campaign from Dalton now to Peachtree. This is your day to shine. This is the day. This is the time. To a man, all of Stuart's guys got it. General Stuart repeated the orders to his 3 division commanders, Loring, Walthall, and French. They in turn gave it to their brigade commanders. They in turn gave it to their regimental commanders, who in turn read it out on the field before the fighting to each of their soldiers. Every single man in the Army of Mississippi, Stuart's Corps, got it. They understood it. Here's what's fascinating. In over 28 years of researching, not a single account in Hardee's 20,000 men, diary, letter, journal, brigade report, division report, regimental report, there ain't a single one of them that you will find, "We understood our orders that this was to be a general fight, that if the enemy were found to be in trenches, we were to take them." Why? Because they couldn't have been there long. They just crossed over the creek. They ain't got time to dig in, right? With 1 foot over the creek. Hit them before they bridged, before they've got artillery, before they've got extra ammo. It was a pretty smart idea, right? Hood gets painted pretty badly because of Franklin and Nashville, and rightly so. But his performance in Atlanta was pretty strong. And this was actually Johnston's idea. And Hood had to take it and beef it up and make it his idea, and he did a pretty good job of doing that. But General Hardee didn't pass that on. Why? We'll talk about that in a minute. Let's look real quickly at the rest of the other side. We'll go to the next slide. Whoop. All right, so we have lined up at the Tanyard Branch. When you go to Peachtree Creek, you'll go to this park. It's a pocket park done by the Works Parks Administration in the 1930s, 33 to be exact, I think, 34. And you're going to stop here at Collier Road there, and you're going to be down in this park. Well, in this park was Featherston's Mississippi attack. 1,230 Mississippians. To the left, you have the 40th Mississippi under Colonel Wallace, 245 men. Second left, you have the 31st Mississippi, under James Drain. The Drain House, French Camp, Mississippi, on the Natchez Trace. If you ever take the Natchez Trace, about halfway between Tupelo and Jackson. French Camp. Stop there for a sandwich and look around the old house. James Drain. James Drain is leading about 215 Mississippians, including my ancestor, Carradine or Jerry Jenkins, Company 31st Mississippi, my great-great-grandfather. Center, you've got the 22nd Mississippi. 22nd Mississippi, okay, about 200 men. Major Otis, O-A-T-I-S. Right center, you have from the coast, the 3rd Mississippi, commanded by Colonel Thomas Mellon. And we have about 167 Mississippians there. And on the far right, a big regiment, the 33rd Mississippi, commanded by a guy named Jabez L. Drake. Not to be confused with James Drain, Jabez with a Z, Drake with a K. Big red hair, big man, like a Viking, big red beard and mustache, okay, big burly man, okay. And he's commanding almost 300 Mississippians. You've got the 1st Mississippi Battalion sharpshooters out front as well, by the way, under James Stigler. All right, so here they come. Their brigade attack comes. What the plan was is when the unit to the right goes up, you wait till they go a couple hundred yards, and then you launch your attack. It was called an in echelon by division, meaning that it's like dominoes falling, a timing mechanism. They didn't have watches to synchronize, so to make sure everybody got in the fight at about the same time, you start over here, these guys launch, then these guys, and then these guys, and so forth, right? Has some interesting effects. One is that if you catch them on the run, you start rolling up the Federal line like that and sweeping them. That's one. The other effect, which happened actually at Chickamauga, is that the enemy may get confused by the attack, and they may pull men out from one part of the line that hadn't been attacked yet to go defend that part of the line, and then that creates a gap, and that's what happened to General Wood and Harrow, and they lost Chickamauga because of that. Well, to the right are Maney's Tennesseans, 5,000. What are they doing? Featherston sees them go up in the woods, doesn't hear much fighting, doesn't hear any firing. He waits the requisite time. It's been a few minutes. Well, I guess they've had an easy time of it up there on the hill. It's our turn. So they come running. Here they come up the hill. Only down here, crossing the creek, we'll go to the next slide. Ward's division, General Ward, has crossed the creek that morning, and he's ordered his men to stack arms in the Bobby Jones golf course. Wasn't a golf course then, it was a cornfield. But they're ordered to stack arms and just to make preparations for camp. So you've got Yankees stacking arms, bathing in the creek, pulling blackberries. It's blackberry picking time in Georgia. And one fella from the 33rd Indiana, Henry Christ, goes down and picks his blackberries in this creek bed where the picking is a little better because it's all been picked out up here. And he goes and he sees all these Mississippians, these Confederates getting ready to attack, and he goes running back to General John Coburn, 19th Michigan, a Michigander, and says, "General, they're coming, they mean to have us." Coburn mounts on his horse, mounts up his brigade, gets ready to make his attack, and says, "We need to get up on that hill where we should have been." Our stupid general, William Ward, by the way, he's an old Kentucky Whig guy, Republican. He's born in Kentucky, then in southern Illinois. Does that sound familiar to anybody? He's pals with the president. He's a political general. He doesn't know anything about birthing babies or about generaling. He knows something about politicking, though, and he is a pal of President. And his nickname was Old Falstaff, by the way. Anybody know what that means? Shakespearean character means old drunken fool. That was his nickname. Probably not told to his face, you reckon. But anyway, he's in command of a division. That means he's a 2-star general. And in command of the 3 brigades. And interestingly, Harrison's brigade, that's Benjamin Harrison of Indianapolis and Indiana fame. He's raised the 70th Indiana. And my bride Sherry has an ancestor in the 70th. So literally in the space of this room, our 2 great-grandfathers fought. Think about that. Think about that. And thankfully they didn't shoot each other that day. But there's the 70th Indiana, and they're going to be making it for Collier's Mill in a second. All right, so Coburn is getting his brigade ready, okay? And he realizes that they should have been up here. Ward has only sent the 22nd Wisconsin under Bloodgood, Colonel Bloodgood, down there to man on the top of the hill in a picket line or skirmish line. Okay, about 300 Federals are up there guarding, and 5,000 Federals are back here with stacked arms, and nobody's dug in. Not very smart. Well, Coburn, as soon as he gets word that they're about to attack, says, "We in the wrong place. Let's get up there." So he's mounting his men. Harrison rides over to him and says, "What goes? What you doing?" He says, "I'm going up there because they're about to be attacked." He said, "I'll be coming with you." He mounts up his brigade as well, and they start moving in the right direction. Independently, James Wood from the Finger Lakes region, 136 New York, white hats, by the way, white felt hats. Pretty cool, huh? White hats, guys. They had 4 companies out here on the skirmish line in advance. But they start moving forward as well. They get the idea that something's afoot and they need to be up there where the risk is. And so here comes old Falstaff. He's probably been nipping. It's 4 o'clock. "What you doing, General Harrison, General Coburn?" "The Rebs are forming for an attack. We should be up on that hill." "I have no orders for this. Hooker's not told me about anything like that." "Well, nevertheless, General, we're going up there." So they go. And later, Ward's going to take all the credit. "My boys did such a great job that day at Peachtree." Okay, so let's move along and talk about what's next. Featherston's Mississippians blow by. They blow over that ridge top. 22nd Wisconsin and the 4 companies of the 136 New York take about 2 shots. That's all they got time for with their single-shot rifles, right? And here comes the Confederates, 1,230. So they fire 2 shots at them and they skedaddle. They're running back to the north. What are Hood's orders? Press any advantage. Don't just take the hill, but keep on going. So they do what they're told to. They keep on going. Only they go forward into this pocket, and there's a false ridge. See that little false hill right here? It's laden with sassafras, which is, some scrub pine and sassafras here. So it's hiding the alluvial plain off in the distance. It's hiding that alluvial plain where the other 5,000 Federals are. So 1,230 Mississippians are about to attack into the maelstrom of 5,000, don't even know it. They're chasing 300, think they've broken the line. Next slide. We'll look at these guys real quick and then we'll zip through. To the left is Harrison. He's going to be our 23rd president from Indianapolis. He's our only Indiana president to date, isn't he? Is that right? And we have General Ward. Here's old Falstaff right here in the flesh. Hope I don't have any descendants of the Wards here. So we'll move to the next. He kind of, okay, and this is Harrison at the Collier's Mill from In Dixie Travel Magazine. We've been loving Yankees coming down to visit us and spending money in the South in tourism. So they even did a tourist thing there in Dixie back in 1937. That's the height of Gone with the Wind. The book came out in 35, didn't it? 4 or 5, and movie's going to be 39. So we were loving all the visitors. Okay, let's move on to the next. This is Claudius Davis, who's going to be killed at Peachtree Creek from the 22nd Mississippi. That's the one in the center. To the next slide. To the left, these are 2 guys from my ancestors unit. The left guy is that James Drain I told you about, the Drain House at French Camp. That's post-war. He kind of looks like my Uncle Benny, by the way. But Colonel Drain was shot 5 times in the fighting at Peachtree Creek and was wounded badly. He was carried off the field. They thought he would bleed out. He did not. They thought they took him back to Atlanta. He sojourned. He was then shipped back home to Mississippi. They thought he would die. He was bedridden for 11 months. And for the next 10 years following the war, splinters of bone would come to the surface on his legs. But he survived the war. To the right is a cousin of mine. I never met him actually, but Marion Hiram Nail. And he was killed at Peachtree. That picture, by the way, when I go to groups, I always ask, I'm curious what people's interests are, because mine is, as you hear, Peachtree Creek or these guys, I love the Army of the Cumberland, especially 20 Corps for the North, and I love the Army of Mississippi, these guys for the Confederates. Why? Because they're the underdogs. They're the ones that never get written about, never get told about. So I love these underdogs. But this, if you're a picture person, this is taken at Corinth, Mississippi, a early war. It's spring of '62. He's got a flower in his cap. This is probably a Mexican war, not a Civil War uniform. Squirrel gun, Bowie knife, pistol. Pretty cool, huh? He didn't look like that at the Battle of Peachtree Creek, but he did for taking his picture. Okay. All right, so here we have the collapsing bag. This is one of the few moments in all of the war where we have hand-to-hand combat. We think it happens all the time, but it actually only happened 15, 20 times in the entire war, where they literally cross bayonets and are in hand-to-hand slugging it out like that. This is one of those Braveheart moments. Think about Mel Gibson in Braveheart. That's what this looks like. The guys literally run right into each other. Only there's 1,250 Mississippians, 1,230 Mississippians, and about 5,000 Federals. Hitting them on 3 sides, they're outnumbered 3-1. Nearly 4-1. And then they're gonna fight it out in that ravine for 20 minutes, hand to hand. When they hit each other, literally 2 of them ran right through, the bayonets ran right through each other. One Federal, one Southerner, with the barrel sticking out the back. And that's gruesome, isn't it? But they said that their bodies were in that statue of death all night. It was not till the next day that they separated the 2 bodies to bury them. Fighting for 20 minutes, the Mississippians could not hold on. They looked to the right. Where are those Tennesseans? Where's our support? 5,000 of them down there in those woods. Where are they? They finally have to fall back. There are just too many against them. So they fall back, not all the way, but to the top of the ridge, Collier Road, where they had taken that position. And they hold on there, and they're on one side of the road, and the Federals advance, and they stop about the other side of the road, or a little beyond. So they're 20 to 30 yards apart, and they fight for 30 yards apart for another 15 minutes. Finally, the Federals muster the courage again to make another attack and charge across that road. And another 5 minutes of hand-to-hand ensues. And at that point, that's where they start capturing the flags and start decimating what's left of the Mississippians. The Mississippians can't hold. They fall back. They fall back toward the Tanyard Branch. They fall about halfway back and lay down where the undulation of the side of the ridge was such that they could continue to fight, to carry the fight. And for the rest of the evening, for 3 hours, that's the way the fighting continues until dark. One fella from the 136th New York takes his musket, club musket, and bashes the head of Captain William Vandegraff of the adjutant, Adjutant William Vandegraff of the 31st Mississippi, killing him and seizing the colors of the 31st Mississippi. As the Mississippians and other similar stories are happening all in this pocket, but as this fella Dennis Buckley, he's a Canadian, by the way, he's come over to join the 136th New York. A lot of Canadians did that. I guess y'all know that being up here. But he's waving that flag jubilantly as if to say, nah, 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 boo, boo, we got you. And the Mississippians are falling back. At about that time, a stray bullet hits the staff, bounces, ricochets into his head, kills him. His mother is given his Medal of Honor posthumously. All told, that 1,230 Mississippians, 5 flags are captured. Each one of their regimental flags are going to be lost in that fighting. We'll go to the next slide. Go to the next one. please. That's the 31st Mississippi flag with the recapture number 229. It was held up in Washington in 1906, returned to the States. This was returned. You can find it on display at the Mississippi Old Capitol Museum in Jackson, Mississippi. Notice it's a 12-star flag. It was a Mobile issue, people that are flag people. It was issued between April and February and April of 1864 by General Johnston. He wanted to standardize all the flags in the Confederate forces. Next slide. That's the 33rd, which is a second national flag. A lot of Loring's division and French's division, which was the old Army of Mississippi. Notice it's a white with the Confederate St. Andrews cross to the left, and then we have the gold bunting at the bottom and around, captured on by who? 26 Wisconsin at Peachtree Creek, July 20. Okay. Next one, we have General Hooker riding up the next day on Collier Road. This is no accident. The sketch artist was there on Collier Road watching the 20 Corps guys celebrating. This was a big victory, and Hooker is celebrating with them. Look at the 5 flags. There's the 33rd Mississippi, 31st Mississippi, 22nd, 3rd, 40th. No accident. 5 flags captured on that ridge. They're still removing wounded and burying the dead the next day. Some of those veterans fought at Gettysburg and Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville before they came west, and they said the fighting there at Peachtree Creek reminded them of the field at Gettysburg. It's that bad. Go to the next slide, please. This is George Bernard, the photographer, with only 2 known pictures of Peachtree Creek. I'm in your way. 2 known pictures of Peachtree Creek. This is one of them, the other one slightly different angle. Both are taken on the Collier Road facing north toward Peachtree Creek. These graves are the graves of Wood's Brigade that include the 26th Wisconsin, 136th New York. These are headboards, footboards facing east toward that great getting up morning, right? Back here is the cornfield. Today is Bobby Jones Golf Course. Over here is Collier Mill Pond. The mill pond on the Tanyard Branch actually spills just back in there to the Peachtree Creek. See this little ridge here with the pine trees and the sassafras tree? That's what blocked the Mississippians from seeing the 5,000 Federals on the other side. They got caught in the bag. Look at this big undulation here. What is that? Is that a trench? Is that a trench there? No. Those are mass graves of the Mississippians. Buried General Jabez Drake. Remember the Viking over here? They buried him and 45 of his men around him in a semicircle with the feet facing to him. A big mass grave. And put on top of the grave, buried here is Colonel Jabez Drake with 55 or 45 of his Mississippians. It was the largest loss of life due to tragedy by the Magnolia State. Shiloh had been. Battle of Shiloh. Peachtree Creek was the larger loss of life for Mississippi until 3 months later at Franklin. If you go to the cemetery there, the McGavick Cemetery at the Carnton Plantation in Franklin, you'll see 1,500 graves. Over 500 of them are Mississippians. The largest loss of life by Mississippi to date by tragedy is in one day was at Franklin, Peachtree's second. It led one poet, a fellow named Newton Berryhill, to write this poem following the Battle of Peachtree Creek, and I'll close with it. Thank you. You're too kind for letting me go on too long, and I know I've rambled a little bit long, but let me close with this poem and I'll quit. It's called Fresh Tidings from the Battlefield. A widowed mother stands and lifts the glasses from her eyes. With trembling, withered hands, fresh tidings from the battlefield. Your only son is slain. He fell with victory on his lips and a bullet in his brain. The stricken mother staggers back and falls from the cottage door, from upon the floor, and the wailing shriek of a broken heart falls from the cottage door. Fresh tidings from the battlefield, the wife her needle plies, while in the cradle at her feet her sleeping infant lies. Fresh tidings from the battlefield, your husband is no more. But he died as soldiers love to die, his wounds were all before. Her work was dropped, oh God, she moaned, and lifts her aching eyes. The orphaned babe in the cradle wakes and joins its mother's cries. Fresh tidings from the battlefield, a maid with pensive eye sits musing near the sacred spot where she heard his last goodbye. Fresh tidings from the battlefield, your lover's cold in death, but he breathed the name of her he loved with his expiring breath. With hands pressed to her snowy brow, she strives her grief to hide. She shrinks from friendly sympathy, a widow ere a bride. Thank you all for letting me come. Do we have time for a question or two, or just a couple? Okay.
The General Ward that is down in Atlanta, is that the fort that's named in Washington, D.C.?
Say that again. General Ward?
Yeah, I think it's the same one they named before.
I believe, I'm not sure. I believe that's true. Old Falstaff, yeah. That was Butterfield's division, by the way, for a long time, up until the Resaca, and then it became Ward. Yes, sir.
How do you explain Maney's division now?
Yeah, what happened to them? One, they didn't get the orders, remember? They weren't told fix bayonets. This was going to be a big blast. In fact, after the battle, Hood later hears from Claiborne that Pat Claiborne's division was held in reserve. They were going to be sent in, and they just got about started to go in, just enough to get a few of them shot, when a rider came from the south saying, General Hood says send a division down on the Decatur Road to the east because McPherson's on the Decatur Road. Hurry to the east. Send somebody down there. So Claiborne's division was pulled back and sent off to the east. The Battle of Bald Hill, July 21, the next day. And later the Battle of Decatur or Atlanta. They had about 45 casualties, though, at Peachtree Creek, that division, before they took off. Claiborne later told Hood in like August that, now I understand it, General Hood. I never understood your orders for Peachtree Creek until you've told me just now in our conversation. I didn't realize that that's what your plan was. Now that makes perfect sense. Well, we could have done some good. Hardy never told me. In fact, Hardy said, be on the lookout for breastworks. He showed timidity. Why did Hardy show timidity? Maybe Hardy was still sulking because Hardy got passed up for command. Remember, he was the ranking general. He was the 54-year-old, and he's the guy that wrote the book, Hardy's Tactics, right? He's the guy that, by rank, should have been placed in command. But Davis overlooked him and went to Hood because he wanted an aggressive offensive warrior. And if he reasoned a lot of people, we don't know exactly why he didn't choose Hardy. Most people think it was because to choose Hardy would be like to choose Johnston light. Same idea, same strategy. Yes, sir.
This is a question to which I've never received a satisfactory answer. I understand there were some fortifications built on the Chupades.
Chupades, yes.
Were designed to keep,
yes, sir.
keep the Union Army from crossing the Chattahoochee. And the idea was supposedly that General
Johnston
was supposed to retreat into the Chupades.
Right.
Fight it out. And why didn't he do that?
Good question. You know where the Cumberland Mall is, northwest of Atlanta, overlooking the Chattahoochee River, the back to the river. A fellow named Francis Shoup, S-H-O-U-P, developed a series of earthworks that were diagonals, star-shaped, back and forth, crisscross stuff. And when the Confederates fell back after Marietta and after Kennesaw, Marietta, Smyrna campground, and then they fell back into the Chattahoochee River line. Okay, while they're there at the Chattahoochee River line, July 5 through July 9, during that week, they're there. The Confederates that get there, they don't know what in the world these things are. They've never seen anything like them. So they immediately start tearing them up and try to straighten them out into long lines. General Claiborne sits up on top of one of them and just sits there and just scratches his head and he looks down at it. Takes him a few minutes. He ponders it. Pat Claiborne says, "Stop. Leave it as it is. I get it. All you got to do is put a couple of companies of men here, a company in that next one, and in that next one, and that means fewer men can defend this. Only 30 men here, 40 men there, 20 men there. Why? Because they have interlocking fire. And they can catch them at all angles. The straight line, you can only catch them at in front of you. You can't take the angles." It was brilliant. World War I-like. It was ahead of its time by 50 years, 60 years, 50 years. That was the Shoup line, Francis Shoup. Didn't get used. Sherman never had any real intention of attacking. He tried to tell Thomas, send some guys at it, but he was really buying time until he could find a way to get across the Chattahoochee River. Johnston didn't have the heart to fight the all-out battle, and Sherman wasn't going to give it to him either. The reason you don't have the big battles in the Atlanta campaign like you do over to the east, Lee and Grant, they didn't mind sacrificing the army to win the war or their cause. Over here, Sherman won it by maneuver, and he had seen enough of Snyder's Bluff and Shiloh and First Manassas to realize that frontal assaults were not going to win a battle or a war. Now, he kind of forgot himself a time or two, like at Resaca and especially at Kennesaw, but by and large, he won it by maneuver, and Johnston wanted to. So it was a chess match. The red clay minuet is what Richard McMurray calls it. It's pretty good likeness. Yes, sir. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
If the whole point was to try and catch Sherman when his three armies were kind of separated from one another and piecemeal destroy one, why would Hood decide that of the three armies to attack, the biggest one with the best defensive general in the army was the one that he should be attacking?
It had more to do with they are crossing Peachtree Creek, thus they are exposed. It could have been any of the armies. It wasn't necessarily that they were picking on the Army of the Cumberland. Obviously, they're the biggest. The Army of the Cumberland alone outnumbers the Confederates facing them. But if they have only 1 foot over and say a third or a half of their forces across the creek, not all of them, and they certainly don't have artillery and they certainly don't have extra ammo, they're not going to withstand a determined assault. And time didn't permit me to tell you the rest of the story to the west, as Paul Harvey would say, but the 4 Confederate brigades that attacked to the west, Featherston, Scott, O'Neill, and Reynolds, those 4 brigades, only about 4,500 Confederates push back about 20,000 Federals briefly, because they're in open country, in the woods, in ravines and woods. Catch them in the flanks and hit them, surprise them, and then of course as the Federals fall back, those advanced skirmish lines fall back, more Federals are down in the alluvial plain just crossing and just had just gotten over. They're going to counterattack and take it. So they're not going to be rolled up or completely surprised. But over to the east, where you have nearly 20,000 Confederates and Hardee not given the right orders, they're going to piecemeal it out and fail to take the key position on that Cardiac Hill and then thus push over, right to left. So in short, Albert Castell, a great book by the way, says, in short, where the Confederates were few, they fought well, i.e. Stuart's Corps at Peachtree. But where they were many, i.e. Hardee's Corps, they fought poorly. I don't blame the men, I blame the leadership over there because of the failure of command in terms of telling them what the objective was. The other problem was they didn't reconnoiter. Had they reconnoitered, they could have figured out that position was sort of unique, that point. It was hard to get all of those units to attack at the same time at that one position. So they came in like piecemeal, like waves, a little bit at a time. Any other? Yes, sir. Scott.
As important a battle as Peachtree Creek was, and why was it so hard to preserve it? The other battlefield.
Oh, great question. After the war, there were efforts. Peachtree Creek was sort of the place, the meeting place. It was north of Atlanta. It was right up the Buckhead Road. There was a rail line out that way. The Bernard picture. Literally, in 1900, they had a big reunion, and for a half a mile, they had this long table that ran all the way from Peachtree Road, or Buckhead Road, all the way to the west down Collier Road. And all the Federals that came, they were invited to come down on the Louisville Railroad Association. They came down, and they all sat on the north side of the table, and all the Confederates veterans sat on the south side. Of course, they shook hands and had a big time of it. But over 5,000 veterans came. And it was really believed that was going to be preserved as a park. There was a movement afoot when that was 1890s, 1900. Chickamauga got built. Of course, Gettysburg, and those were some of the first ones in the country. And then after that, as more parks were being built, Peachtree Creek fell victim of the times when it was when it became popular to build. There was no economy in the 20s. The Depression hit, and there's no stomach for building federal parks. There's no money for it. Finally, the third effort came along after the Gone with the Wind, Margaret Mitchell and all that, right? Made Atlanta popular again. In the 30s, there was one final push to build a national park at Peachtree Creek. The plan was to build a 3 parks in one, with a road that would have been centered at Peachtree Creek, would be the apex, and it would go semicircle out to the east to pick up Decatur or Atlanta, and then out to the west to Ezra Church. Wouldn't that be a neat park today if we'd have had that? It would look like Richmond. The park or Vicksburg, how you have that driving tour of Vicksburg or Richmond that goes on for 20 miles and so forth. Instead you get, well, what they did was they said that we only have enough money to build one park this year. You can pick it. You Southern senators, it's Kennesaw or Peachtree, you pick it. Well, we won at Kennesaw. Besides the real, and that I jest a bit, but the real reason is there was already a monument there for McCook. There was already a monument at Kennesaw, and so it was decided that would be the park. So Kennesaw Mountain became the park to be the park for the Atlanta campaign. I call it the Georgia campaign, by the way, because it was the whole state. It wasn't just Atlanta. One last question. Yes, sir?
Yeah, we've heard that Johnston was going to attack at Peachtree Creek and Butcher over and
Yep.
attack. But were there differences between the plans?
That's a great question. Yes, Bill Scaife's got a great book. Well, he's passed on now, but Bill Scaife has a book that sort of details the difference between the two. Johnston's idea was to have Stewart's guys fall back, kind of the rope-a-dope idea of Muhammad Ali, fall back to the other side of Peachtree Creek, and then just kind of stand there on top of the alluvial plain, Collier Road, that area, and just sort of hold the line and be the anvil, and then bring Hardee over, and they'd be the hammer, and push those Yankees from east to west. Hood liked the idea, but then decided to beef it up by adding Stewart's men to the attack. The attack should have been from Peachtree Road to the west, out toward today's, past Northside Drive, and out to today's Howell Mill Road. That was supposed to be the attack front, but Hardee wound up going too far to the east to deal with the threat that McPherson's guys caused. The fog of war, the Yankees moving too fast to the east, caused that somewhat deranged the plan and slowed it down by 3 hours and took them out of line a mile and a half to the east, such that a lot of the offensive capability of Hardee was wasted way out there in to the east and didn't get in the attack properly. Anybody else? Thank you very much for letting me come.